A paper cup hit the floor and burst. Hot coffee splashed across a stack of files. A man dropped to his knees and grabbed at the papers with his bare hands, trying to save them before the stain spread. He didn't knock. He just pushed the office door open with his shoulder, arms full, eyes down. And he froze. Standing 3 feet in front of him was a woman, half-dressed, her ruined blouse still clutched in her hand. For one long second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. His name was Daniel, 34 years old, a single father, and the man who had just walked in on his boss at the worst possible moment. He turned to run. He was already counting the days until the bills came due with no paycheck to cover them. But what she did next was something he never saw coming. Stay with me on this one. Let me back up and tell you how Daniel ended up in that room. The morning had started the way every morning started for him. In the dark, the alarm went off at 5, and he was up before it finished ringing, because the walls in the apartment were thin and his daughter slept just on the other side of them. Her name was Lily. She was 7 years old, and she was the entire reason this man got out of bed. He made her lunch first. Same as always. A sandwich cut into triangles, because she wouldn't eat it any other way. An apple. A note folded inside the bag that said something small. "You've got this." Or "Dad loves you." Little things. He'd been writing those notes since her mother left, and that was almost 4 years back now. Daniel didn't talk about Lily's mother much. There wasn't much to say. One day she was there, and then there was a packed bag by the door, and then there wasn't. She didn't call. She didn't send money. She just became a quiet space in the apartment where a person used to be. And Daniel had stopped waiting for her a long time ago. He had a little girl to raise, and waiting didn't pay the rent. Here's the thing you have to understand about Daniel. He wasn't a big talker. He wasn't the kind of man who made a scene or pushed to the front of a room. He worked. That was who he was. He showed up early, he kept his head down, and he did the job right. And he believed, the way a lot of quiet men believe, that if he just worked hard enough, things would eventually turn his way. So far, they hadn't. There were months where he sat at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep and moved the same small amount of money between the same bills, trying to make it stretch one more week. There were nights he skipped dinner himself so there'd be enough for hers, and told her he'd eaten at work. She believed him. That was the only mercy in it. A 7-year-old still believes her father has it all handled, and Daniel worked very hard to make sure she kept believing that for as long as she could. The job was at a mid-sized firm downtown. Daniel worked in the records department, 2 floors below the executives, in a room with no windows and too much fluorescent light. He filed. He organized. He carried boxes. It wasn't the job he dreamed about as a younger man, but it had health insurance, and health insurance meant Lily's asthma inhaler didn't cost him a week's pay. So he stayed. He was grateful, even. That's the kind of man he was. His boss ran the whole floor above him. Her name was Claire Bennett, 41 years old, sharp, private, and respected by everybody who worked under her, even the ones who were a little afraid of her. She wore tailored suits, and she remembered everyone's name, and she did not, as a rule, let people get close. Daniel had spoken to her maybe a handful of times in 2 years. Always short, always polite. A nod in the hallway. A yes, ma'am when she handed down a task. He didn't think she knew much about him beyond his name on a badge. What he didn't know was that she had noticed him. Not in any dramatic way. She'd just noticed, the way careful people notice things, that the man from records was always the first one in the building. That he never complained. That once, when a co-worker had been short a ride and stranded after a late shift, it was Daniel who quietly drove 20 minutes out of his way to get her home, and never mentioned it to anyone. Claire noticed people who did good things when they thought no one was watching. It was a habit from her own life, one we'll get to. On the morning this story really begins, Daniel got a call before 9. A delivery of old case files needed to go up to the executive floor, and the regular runner had called in sick. So Daniel loaded a cart, stacked the boxes, and grabbed himself a coffee from the break room on the way, because he'd been up since 5 and the day was already long. He took the elevator up. He'd never been to that floor much. It was quieter up there. Carpet instead of tile. The boss's office was at the end of the hall, and the door was almost closed, just open a crack. He balanced the boxes against his hip. He knocked once with his elbow, soft, and the door drifted open, because it hadn't been latched. And that's where it all went wrong. Because just as he stepped through, the coffee cup tipped off the top box. And Daniel did what anyone would do. He lunged to catch it. He never looked up. Not until it was too late. The cup hit the floor anyway. Hot coffee went everywhere. Across the boxes, across the files inside them, across the carpet. And Daniel dropped to his knees on instinct, grabbing at the papers, trying to pull them clear of the spreading stain before the records were ruined. That's why he didn't see her at first. His eyes were down. His hands were full. It was the silence that made him look up. Claire Bennett was standing 6 feet away, beside her desk, in the middle of changing out of a blouse that had its own coffee stained down the front from her own spill earlier that morning. She'd shut her door for exactly that reason. She had a fresh shirt halfway in her hands. And now there was a man on his knees in her office, looking right at her. For 1 second, neither of them moved. Then Daniel's whole body went cold. He shot to his feet so fast he nearly knocked the cart over. He spun around to face the wall. The door. Anywhere but at her. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out fast and broken. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. The door, it wasn't shut. I knocked. I swear I knocked. I didn't. I wasn't. I'm sorry." He couldn't even finish a sentence. His face was burning. His hands were shaking. He was already reaching for the cart to back out of the room, leaving the spilled coffee, the ruined files, all of it, because none of that mattered now. All that mattered was getting out. And in his head, the math had already started. He was going to be fired. That was certain. A man walks in on his boss half-dressed. There's no version of that story where he keeps his job. It didn't matter that it was an accident. It didn't matter that the door was open. He knew how these things went. The man always loses. He'd be gone by end of day, and then what? Rent was due in 11 days. Lily had a dentist appointment next week he'd already had to reschedule once. The insurance. The inhaler. All of it ran through his mind in the space of about 3 seconds, the way your whole life is supposed to flash before you when you're drowning. Because that's what it felt like. Drowning. "Ma'am, I'll have my things cleared out," he said, still facing the wall. "I understand. I won't make any trouble. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." He expected shouting. He expected the cold voice he'd heard her use exactly once, on a vendor who'd lied to her, a voice that could strip paint off a wall. He braced for it. It didn't come. Behind him, he heard the soft sounds of her finishing buttoning the fresh shirt. Calm. Unhurried. And then her voice, and it wasn't sharp at all. "Daniel," she said. "Turn around. It's fine. I'm dressed." He turned slowly. He kept his eyes somewhere around her shoulder, not quite able to meet her face. She was looking at him, not with anger, with something else, something he couldn't read. She glanced down at the mess on the floor, the coffee, the wet files, and then back up at him. "You were trying to save the files," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd seen it. "On your knees, grabbing paper, before you even noticed I was here." Daniel didn't know what to say. "Yes," he managed. "The records. I didn't want them ruined. I'm sorry about the coffee. I'll pay for the cleaning." Claire studied him for a long moment. And here's a man, she thought, who walked into the most embarrassing situation of his life, and his first instinct, before fear, before anything, was to protect the work, not himself. She'd spent 20 years watching people in moments of pressure. Pressure showed you who someone really was. She'd seen people lie, blame, scramble to cover themselves. This man had thrown himself at the floor to save a box of paper that wasn't even his fault. "It's an accident," she said finally. "The door wasn't latched. That's on me, not you. Get a towel from the break room for the carpet, and we'll forget it happened." Daniel blinked. That was it. That was it. She'd already turned back to her desk, already reaching for her glasses, already moving on, like the last 5 minutes had been nothing more than a spilled cup of coffee. Which, to her, maybe it was. He cleaned up the mess with shaking hands. He apologized 2 more times. She waved him off both times, not unkindly. And then he wheeled his cart out of that office and rode the elevator back down 2 floors. And the whole way down, he kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't. By lunchtime, nothing had happened. No call from HR. No email. No summons. Daniel sat at his desk in the windowless records room and ate the second half of the sandwich he'd packed for himself, and slowly, carefully, he let himself breathe. Maybe it really was fine. Maybe she'd meant it. Maybe, for once, the man didn't lose. He texted his sister, who watched Lily after school. "Rough morning," he wrote. "Tell you later. All good now. All good now." He believed it. He actually let himself believe it. He finished his shift, picked up his daughter, made her dinner, read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through, and went to bed thinking the worst day had somehow turned out okay. He had no idea what was coming. The trigger came 2 days later, and it came from a direction Daniel never expected. Somebody had seen him. That morning, when Daniel had wheeled his cart down the executive hallway, another employee had been at the far end. A man named Greg, from accounting, who'd been waiting outside a different office. Greg had seen Daniel go into Claire's office. He'd seen, through the cracked door, a flash of something that he'd decided, in his own head, was a story. And Greg liked stories, especially ones that made other people look bad. By the end of the week, it had spread. It didn't spread as the truth. It spread as a rumor, twisted and ugly, the way rumors do. By the time it reached the third or fourth person, the story wasn't a single dad accidentally walking in on a spill. The story was that something had happened between Daniel and the boss. That maybe he'd been keeping his job through something other than work. That maybe Claire Bennett, who nobody could ever get close to, had a reason for keeping that quiet man around. And then it reached HR. This is the part where everything changed. Because the moment that rumor reached HR, it stopped being personal and became something Daniel couldn't fight with an apology. It became a file, an inquiry, a formal matter with his name on it. He found out on a Thursday. An email landed in his inbox, cold and official. Please report to the HR office at 2 o'clock regarding a workplace conduct matter. That was all it said. Daniel read it 4 times. His stomach dropped through the floor. A conduct matter. He knew exactly what that meant, and worse, he knew how it would look. There was no proof of anything, because nothing had happened. But that didn't matter, did it? He'd learned a long time ago that the truth was often the least important part of these things. What mattered was the story, and the story already had him guilty. And it wasn't just the job now. That was the thing that put real fear in him. A conduct matter on his record. If he got let go for that, it would follow him. The next employer would see it. And in the back of his mind sat the thing he never said out loud to anyone, the thing that kept him up at night. He was a single father. His ex-wife had walked out years ago, but the custody papers said what they said. And if she ever came back, if she ever decided she wanted Lily, a father who'd been fired for misconduct was a father who could lose his daughter. So this wasn't about embarrassment anymore. This was about everything. What made it worse was that Daniel had no way to fight it. He couldn't stand in the break room and explain himself to every person who'd heard the story, because the more a man defends himself against a rumor, the guiltier he looks. He knew that. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He came in early, kept his head down, did his work, and felt the eyes on him in the hallway, and said nothing. He carried it the way he carried everything. Alone. Daniel walked into that HR office at 2 o'clock feeling like a man walking to his own sentencing. There were 2 people from HR behind the desk. And there, sitting off to the side, was Claire Bennett. He hadn't expected her to be there. His heart sank further. He figured she'd come to distance herself, to protect her own name, to say whatever she needed to say to make sure none of this stuck to her, even if it meant it all stuck to him. The HR woman started talking. She used careful words. A concern had been raised. An allegation regarding the nature of the relationship. They wanted to ask him some questions. And before Daniel could even open his mouth, Claire spoke. "I'd like to address this directly," she said. The room went quiet. What followed was the first time in this whole story that things broke Daniel's way. Because Claire Bennett did not distance herself. She did the opposite. She told them exactly what happened. The whole truth. Her own coffee spill that morning. Her decision to change in her office with the door shut. The fact that the latch on that door had been broken for weeks, which she had reported, in writing, and which maintenance had never fixed. She pulled up the email to prove it. She told them about the records delivery, the runner who'd called in sick, the second spill. She told them that Daniel had been on his knees trying to save company files when he looked up, and that he had apologized and tried to leave so fast he'd nearly hurt himself. "This man did nothing wrong," she said. "The only thing that happened in my office was an accident caused by a door I asked this company to fix 6 weeks ago. If anyone wants to file something, file it against the work order that never got done. Not against him." She wasn't loud. She was precise. And every word of it was true. And the truth, coming from her, landed like a weight. The HR people looked at each other. And just like that, the air in the room changed. Daniel sat there, stunned. He'd walked in expecting to be thrown to the wolves. And instead the one person who could have ended his career had just put her own name on the line to defend his. If you've ever had someone stand up for you when you were sure you were standing alone, You know exactly what Daniel felt in that chair. If this story is hitting you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps stories like this reach the people who need them. Now let me tell you what happened after that room cleared out, because this is where it really turns. Because clearing his name was only the beginning. After the HR meeting, Claire asked Daniel to walk with her. They went down to the small courtyard behind the building, where the smokers usually stood, empty now in the middle of the afternoon. Daniel still didn't fully trust that the ground was solid under him. He kept waiting for the catch. "There isn't one," Claire said, reading his face. "I didn't defend you to set up some favor. I defended you because it was true. I want you to hear that." Daniel nodded. "Thank you," he said. The words felt too small. "You didn't have to do that. You could have lost a lot." "I could have," she agreed. "But I've spent 20 years watching people decide whether to tell the truth when it costs them something. Most people don't. You did. In there, the second you got the chance." "So did I?" They stood in silence for a moment. And then Claire asked him a simple question, the kind people ask without expecting much. She asked why he was always the first one in the building. Daniel almost gave the easy answer, the polite one. But something about the day, about being defended, about being seen, made him tell the truth instead. "I dropped my daughter at before-school care at 6:15, he said. "It's the earliest slot they have. So I come straight here after. It's just the two of us. Has been for almost 4 years." And Claire went quiet. Because there it was. The thing she'd half-sensed about this man without ever knowing the shape of it. She asked about Lily. And Daniel, who never talked about his life, found himself talking. About the asthma. About the inhaler that cost a fortune without the insurance this job gave him, which was the real reason he'd been so terrified to lose it. About the notes in the lunchbox. About reading 2 chapters a night. About how his ex had walked out and never looked back. And how the only thing that scared him in this world was the thought of failing that little girl. He didn't say it for sympathy. He said it plainly, the way he said everything. But Claire heard all of it. And here's the part of her own story that I told you we'd come back to. Claire Bennett had been raised by a single father. Her own mother had left when she was 6. And her father had worked himself half to death in a job he hated to keep the lights on and keep her fed, and he'd packed her lunches, and he'd read to her at night when he was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open. He'd died 2 years before any of this, and Claire had spent those 2 years burying herself in work so she wouldn't have to feel how much she missed him. So when this quiet man stood in a courtyard and described, without knowing it, the exact life her father had lived, something in Claire Bennett came loose. She didn't show it. Not then. She just said, quietly, "Your daughter is lucky." And she meant it more than he could know. Now, here's where she did the thing nobody saw coming. Over the next weeks, things began to change for Daniel, and at first he couldn't figure out why. A position opened up. A real one. 2 floors up, in coordination, with a salary that was nearly double what records paid and hours that actually fit a single father's life, a schedule built around school pickup instead of against it. Daniel saw the posting and didn't even apply, because men like him didn't get jobs like that. Then his manager told him he'd been recommended. By name. By Claire. He got the job. But she didn't stop there. The company had a hardship fund nobody ever talked about, money set aside for employees going through a rough stretch. Claire, who sat on the committee, made sure Daniel knew it existed, and made sure his application for help with Lily's medical costs actually got read instead of buried. It got approved. And the broken door, the one that started all of it, Claire used the whole mess as leverage to force a full safety review of the floor, and she made sure the report named the maintenance failures plainly, so that what had nearly destroyed an innocent man became the reason a dozen things finally got fixed. Daniel tried to thank her. Every time, she brushed it off the same way she'd brushed off his apologies that first morning. But the man wasn't a fool. He could see what was happening. This woman, who let nobody close, was quietly rebuilding his entire life from the outside and asking for nothing back. And the strange thing was, the more she did, the more he understood that it wasn't pity. Pity he would have felt. He'd felt it from other people before, that careful, distant kindness that makes you feel smaller. This was different. When Claire talked to him, she talked to him like an equal who'd simply gotten a worse run of luck. She never once made him feel like a charity case. She made him feel like a man who'd been overlooked, and who was finally, simply, being seen for what he was worth. So one Friday, he did something brave for a man like him. He invited her to dinner. Not a fancy place. His place. He told her Lily had heard about the lady from work who fixed everything and wanted to meet her and had insisted on making dessert. Claire Bennett, who had turned down every invitation for years, said yes before he finished asking. The dinner was nothing fancy. It couldn't have been. Daniel made spaghetti because it was the one thing he could make that Lily would actually eat, and Lily made a lopsided chocolate cake that sank in the middle and tasted, by all accounts, slightly of salt. Claire ate 2 pieces. She sat at that small table in that thin-walled apartment, and she watched a father cut his daughter's garlic bread without being asked, and she watched the little girl show off a drawing she'd made. And at some point in the evening, Claire Bennett, who had built 20 years of walls around herself, felt them come down without a sound. She started coming around after that. Not all at once. Slow, the way real things happen. A dinner here. A school play she showed up to, sitting in the back, that Daniel hadn't even known she'd come to until he saw her clapping. She helped Lily with a science project on a Sunday afternoon and got glue in her hair and laughed about it. And Daniel realized he'd never once heard her laugh at the office. The rumor that started it all faded the way rumors do when there's nothing to feed them. Greg from accounting, the man who'd lit the match, found that the story made him look small and petty once the truth came out, and he stopped telling it. People at work eventually saw Daniel and Claire for what they actually were, which was 2 careful people who'd each spent a long time alone, slowly deciding to stop being alone. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big scene. That's not who either of them was. But about a year after a coffee cup hit the floor and burst, Daniel stood in that same courtyard behind the building. And this time, he wasn't afraid of anything. Claire was beside him. Lily was between them, holding both their hands, swinging her feet off the low wall. And Daniel thought about that morning, the one he'd been so sure had ruined him. He'd walked through a door he thought would cost him everything, and on the other side of it, somehow, was the thing he'd stopped letting himself hope for. Funny how that works. The worst moment of his life had turned out to be the door to the best one. Not because he was lucky, because in the 1 second when everything went wrong, he'd done the same thing he always did when he thought no one was watching. He'd reached out to save something other than himself, and someone had finally been watching. Here's what I keep coming back to with this one. Daniel never raised his voice in this whole story. He never demanded anything. He never fought for himself, not once. He was just a man who got up at 5 in the dark, packed triangle sandwiches, wrote little notes, and did the right thing when it was hardest and cost him the most. For years, that quiet decency got him nothing but a windowless room and a stack of bills. He'd started to believe that was all it would ever get him. A lot of good people believe that. Maybe you've believed it yourself. But the thing about the kind of good Daniel carried is that it's never actually invisible. Somebody always sees it eventually. Maybe not when you want them to. Maybe not who you expect. But the man who keeps doing right when no one's looking is building something, quietly, brick by brick, even when it feels like he's building nothing at all. Claire saw a man on his knees trying to save a box of paper that wasn't his fault, and in that one image she understood everything she needed to know about who he was. She'd grown up beside a man exactly like him. She knew what that kind of quiet love was worth, because she'd watched her own father give it, and she'd spent 2 years grieving the fact that she'd never gotten to repay him for it. So maybe, in a way, helping Daniel was how she finally got to. They married the following spring. Small ceremony. Lily was the flower girl, and she took the job very seriously, and she did not stop talking about it for a month. Daniel kept the job 2 floors up. Claire kept her walls down, at least for the 2 people who'd earned their way past them. And the apartment with the thin walls got traded for a house with a yard, where a little girl could grow up with 2 parents who'd both chosen her, on purpose, with their whole hearts. And every so often, when Daniel makes Lily's lunch in the early morning quiet, he still folds a little note inside the bag. You've got this. Dad loves you. He's been doing it for years now, and he'll keep doing it until she's grown. Because that was always the point. Not the job, not the recognition, not even the love he found, as much as he treasures it. The point was a little girl who would always know, every single day, that somebody saw her and showed up and stayed. That's the whole thing, really. That's all any of us are after. Somebody who sees us when we think no one does, and stays.